We do have a bit of extra time, but to keep on time, we'll get going with panel number 1. So thank you so much, Claudia, for inviting me here today. Really exciting to be part of your research and this thinking, which I think is overdue to really think about not just exhibitions as a category, but actually what we do and why we do exhibition histories and how we do that. So very appreciate the invitation. And I'm going to introduce, so panel number 1 is a small panel of one person. So let me introduce Dominic Bilton. And Dominic is a project producer and works predominantly, I was going to say, but primarily on the Whitworth's adult public programme and is a socially engaged curator. We'll be talking about that today. He co-curated with Imogen Holmes-Rowe the exhibition Undefining Queer, which I think is going to be the focus of Dominic's presentation, in collaboration with the charity LGBT Foundation in Manchester, and is currently working on the new socially engaged exhibition Recoverist Curators in collaboration with the Recoverist arts organisation Portraits of Recovery. And Dominic developed the project Queering the Whitworth, providing a framework for the Whitworth's LGBTQIA+ focused programming. And his writing can be found in the journal Stages, published by Liverpool Biennial, and has co-edited the special edition of the journal Art and the Public Sphere, Queering, Art, Curation and Collaboration. And that triangulation, I think, is going to be what we'll be talking about today. Dominic also teaches and has taught on the MA Art Gallery and Museum Studies programme at the University of Manchester, where he also supervised MA dissertations. And his current research interests are in the innovative approaches to socially engaged museum practices via art utile, the idea of the constituent museum, queering, and curatorial approaches to care. So, welcome, Dominic.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you, Ben, for the invitation and for the introduction. I've learned to speak very slowly because I've got quite a strong northern accent. So if there's anything that not as strong as Claudia's accent, however, but you know, if there's it's lovely. So if there's anything that you don't understand or you need me to repeat, then please, I'm more than happy to do that. Yes, so I shall start. On my topic, Undefining Queer, a case study for the queer caring turn. Saskia Baylor, in her book Caring Infrastructures, Transforming the Arts Through Feminist Curating, 2024, refers to the explosive engagement with care within academia and the museum as the caring turn. This paper will explore how the caring turn helps to inform the development of the exhibition Undefining Queer by queering feminist care theory. Oh, let me just move over a slide. I've got some little notes for slides. There we go. I will explore within this presentation how the exhibition challenged some of the complexities that the LGBTQIA+ community face by thinking differently and challenging my own approach to museum practice and that of care. By quoting Lynch, Baker and Lyons in the book Feminist Care Theory 2009, we developed an exhibition that was built upon, and I quote them here, an equality of possibilities for developing relationships of love, care and solidarity. However, my approach to care has been somewhat of a slower burner and an emergence within my own academic thinking, despite my practice having care as a central facet within it. For example, it was important that we centred care at the heart of Undefining Queer. Care for our participants, care for our visitors, care for our practitioners, and care for our staff. In the introductory essay for the Undefining Queer catalogue, of which I've got many slides, but not one of the catalogue, unfortunately. Sorry, it's because I ad-libbed. I shouldn't ad-lib, I should just read. Where are we? Oh, yes, Lynda. Solidarity of care. However, my approach to care was somewhat of a slow emergence within my own academic thinking, despite my practice having care as a central facet within it. For example, it was important that we centred care at the heart of Undefining Queer. Care for our participants, care for our visitors, care for our practitioners, and care for our staff. In the introductory essay of the Undefining Queer catalogue, I wrote that, and I quote, "Care is fundamental to the Whitworth, an art gallery in a park that is for everyone. It is a place to come together and find refuge, a place to care for people and our culture. Art helps us make connections with the complexities of the world and to think differently. It should address what matters in people's lives, respond to current urgencies, and contribute solutions. Art is a tool for active social change." Indeed, within my own department, the Civic Engagement and Education Department at the Whitworth, our experience of working on other participatory projects, such as Still Parents, for example, which was a socially engaged exhibition that worked with over 300 people who had experienced baby loss at a point within their pregnancy, we understand the importance of art being a tool for social change. This understanding is conceptually thought through by collaborating with professional networks, especially when working with vulnerable or marginalised groups. This approach to collaboration with charities and organisations helps us care for our participants by providing a safety net for them should they need support. Nuala Morse, in her book The Museum as a Space of Social Care, 2021, describes the concept of social care, which serves to connect the discrete, caring practice of community engagement workers to the wider social role of the museum. Whilst I do agree with Morse in her understanding of social care, it is important, I think, to understand that a lot of engagement professionals working with community groups to develop exhibitions like Undefining Queer or Still Parents are not from counselling or mental health backgrounds. Thus, the importance of working with a charity or organisation that can care, not only for participants of the project, but also to help support artists, practitioners and museum professionals. Saskia Bailey refers to this approach in her book as a caring infrastructure, concentrating on care as a theme for participatory engagement and artistic and discursive production and representation. Oh, where am I? I've pressed too many times. I can certainly relate to Baylor's caring infrastructure in the importance of the development of Undefining Queer. The premise of my exhibition was to develop a community group of intersectional people who self-identified, or I don't know why I said identify, I still think that they all still do, as LGBTQIA+, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer and or questioning, intersex and asexual, who would help us queerly interrogate language, histories and narratives within the Whitworth's practice and collections. More specifically, the project and exhibition would help us to redress historic omissions that have existed as a result of heteronormative museum practice. In order to develop the group, we partnered with the LGBT Foundation, who facilitated the call-out for participants by using its extensive networks. This partnership with a national organisation who provides a range of services to support the LGBTQIA+ community ensured that a member of their wellbeing team was present during our participatory sessions, helping to provide a caring infrastructure for everyone involved. The process of queering, then, within any institution should start with the process of troubling our own positionality. This is my thinking. After all, queerness is a positionality for whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate and the dominant, to paraphrase from the writings of seminal queer theorists, such as Munoz, Cedric, Halperin, and what Judith Butler refers to in critically queer, as a site of collective contestation, contestation being the action or process of arguing or disrupting. I do think that Judith Butler's writing sometimes does need to be explained, as it's very exclusionary, in my opinion. This was something I was becoming more self-aware of as I watched myself on videos talk about a myriad of LGBTQ+IA artists, but in particular female and/or artists from the global majority. After all, I am a white, cisgendered gay man, in case you didn't know. However, just in case you didn't. However, this initial questioning of my positionality only really came into my thought processes whilst recruiting our participants for Undefining Queer, and only in relation to making sure the group was made up of a representation of the diverse nature of LGBTQIA plus community members in Greater Manchester, people from the global majority, trans and non-binary people, and older people, for example. This is a photo for John. However, it wasn't until Alistair Hudson became director of the Whitworth in 2017, after the departure of Maria Bolshaw for Tate, and the gallery became a constituent museum, that I was able to see how the process of queering could really happen. This is because constituent museum practice is a form of participatory practice that places the museum's relationship with its constituents at the heart of what it does. It places collaborative, co-produced engagement at the centre of its practice with its users. John Byrne writes in the Constituent Museum book 2018 that museums have a key role to play in this social reimagining of our futures, and that new forms of fluid, flexible and collaborative institutionalisation are necessary if this reimagining is to move beyond the level of symbolic and utopian rhetoric. To quote Noala Morse again, caring work takes time, effort, a proactive willingness to care for others, and an awareness of the dynamics of caring relations. This is not to say that caring cannot be learnt, but it does require working at. We worked with the Undefining Queer constituent group for 2 years before the installation of the main exhibition, meeting monthly in the art stores, queering artworks, or working with LGBTQIA plus practitioners to develop interpretation for the exhibition. This allowed us to move beyond I'm very tongue-tied. This allowed us to move beyond a level of the symbolic and utopian rhetoric to the development of a meaningful engagement and of inclusion. Where are we? Okay. It was also important to me that the framework with which the project developed was one in which queerness could flourish. It was evident that within the theoretical approach to becoming a constituent museum, because queerness aligned itself with the theoretics of the constituent museum, to quote Byrne, et al., constituents are fluid, mutable protein. They grow, they change, they adapt, they hybridize and reform according to circumstances and needs. As such, constituencies are always in the process of both becoming and unbecoming. Constituencies result from a process of social production whose mediums and vehicles are, of necessity, collaborative. So, whilst I was thinking about the constituent form of practice through a lens of queerness, I'm now starting to write about this form of participatory practice through a lens of care too. Or, to quote Morse one last time, social care. In 2017, I initiated... Let me just put me a picture of myself up. There I am. In 2017, I initiated a project called Queering the Whitworth, where the project works on the understanding that throughout history, the biographies of our LGBTQIA plus artists, artworks, or subject matters have been omitted from the canon of art history. By researching the collection from a queer perspective, it allows us to challenge the dominant heteronormative position that art history and the museum finds itself within. Initially, the Queering the Whitworth project started with queer tours and talks. Here I am giving one on Valentine's Day, actually. Rather than people going out with themselves for nice meals, they come to listen to me talk about queer art, so that was quite nice that people turned up. So the Queering the Whitworth project started with tours and talks, but has now developed to be the framework with which our queer programming at the Whitworth sits within. However, to quote Baz Hendricks in the book Queer Exhibition Histories, these projects have come to the light of day because committed individuals lobby for them. However, whilst I did lobby for queer representation within the gallery because I did not see myself, my friends, my lovers, my community, or my queer history represented within the Whitworth, I am really pleased to say now that I am now not the only one doing this work, and I do have very committed colleagues, including queerness, within their own practices. But I was lobbying at first to start Queer in the Whitworth because I cared about the LGBTQ plus community's representation within the gallery. And here I am again with that word care back in 2017. I only used to see queering as an alternative form of practice that used queer theory as a method in order to theoretically trouble the dominant understandings of the museum. However, I am now starting to include care within my own practice of queering and my theoretical development of the verb to queer. By including care within my understanding of queering, it opens my practice up to the ethics of care, also known as feminist care theory. To quote Baylor, care work is a basic form of labour that sustains social life and a kind of social system to function. It is a field that all of us draw upon to survive. For the feminist political theorist Joan Tronto, I quote, care needs to be recognised as a central public concern, a notion Tronto refers to as caring with. She goes on to say that the way that care is organised across society plays into the central role of reproducing inequalities. However, if we alter the gendered, racialised, classed and ableist conditions of care, it can carry a transformative potential for the wider society. This is why I talk slow so then I don't get tongue-tied. If I place care as a central facet within my own work, my work goes somewhere to challenge traditional normative assumptions that care speaks only to the moral life as experienced by women, and which is particularly experienced in the private sphere of the family and the home, to quote Stephanie Collins in her book, The Core of Care Ethics. I do not wish to take anything away from the unpaid labour of women within the private sphere of the home, but I want to be able to develop an understanding of where I can shoulder some of that moral responsibility on care and challenge the male position on care within exhibition making in particular. To quote Baylor again, feminist care ethics allows for an understanding of curating care as a political, democratising, activist activity that is rooted in the recognition of our interdependencies. Baylor's quote on activist activity in relation to feminist care ethics and how we curated care in the Undefining Queer exhibition highlights particularly for me my care of the trans community. It would be remiss of me to not highlight within this talk the importance of trans representation within queer exhibition making. To quote Krasny, Ling and Fritsch et al. In Radicalising Care, Feminist and Queer Activism in Curating, most painfully, white supremacist, capitalist, imperialist, cisnormative, heteronormative patriarchy not only is alive and kicking, but has actually come back with the most brutal vengeance, as we've literally seen in Poland the last few days with their far-right government. The Whitworth has not been immune to this far-right rhetoric either, both online and in person within our exhibition spaces. Initially, before the main Undefining Queer exhibition opened to the public, the project, in its infancy, was shown across two spaces in the gallery. The School of Creativity, the then new community space within the gallery which displayed the participants' work, as we facilitated and explored the use of queer language, which showcased the group's ongoing thinking as a gradual mood board emerged for the main exhibition The second space, the Collection Care Centre, which we can see here, displayed over 40 artworks that had a queer interpretation applied to those works by the group. This space actively invited people from the LGBT community, their friends, families and allies. Have I gone too far? There I am. Where am I? Okay, great. This is why if I go off kilter then I'm lost. Sorry. their friends, families and allies to contribute to a queer glossary via the use of comment cards, as we can see here, which were then displayed within both of those gallery spaces. In both spaces, we received transphobic comments, either via the comments cards left in the spaces, in both spaces, or online by trans exclusionary radical feminists, although I would not call them feminists. To quote Krasny, Ling and Fritsch, again, they write, claiming curating for any emancipatory and transformative politics and moving curating, care and activism closer together is no easy task. And I completely agree with them, it is not. The good thing about our project spaces was that they were test beds, they were incubator spaces for the project to develop and grow, and we did just that. This is not the best one. This is the best one, okay. With the negative feedback that we received from some right-wing thinkers about our trans community, we decided to activate the main exhibition spaces by painting the walls in the trans flag colours of pink, blue and white. And to use a particular phrase which online trolls had found offensive, that of chosen family. Chosen family, that was the subject for the online trolling. We decided to choose this as a theme within the exhibition. We took the negative and brought a transformative politics of curation, care and activism closer together. From a feminist perspective then, care can be seen as not just practical, but also relational, emotional, intimate and affective, with Lynn, Baker and Lyons considering love, care, solidarity work in their exploration of affective equality. The Whitworth, in our continued support of our trans community and exploring what affective equality means as we partner on a new national project to advance trans inclusion across museums, galleries and heritage organisations. In partnership with the University of Leicester's Research Centre for Museums and Galleries, along with 10 other organisations from around the UK, we will be working closely with a team of experts in trans inclusion, equality law and ethics to develop new guidance and practical resources for the UK's culture sector that will be launched in 2026. And we could not be prouder to be part of this project. To sum up, because I think I've spoken for quite some time, to sum up, as I start my initial thinking about the inclusion of care within my own work, within social care, to quote Morse, or in developing an infrastructure of care, to quote Baylor, or to care with, to quote Tronto, it is apparent that my querying needs always to be informed by or have an incorporation of feminist care theory and always should. To quote Lynn, Baker and Lyons for the last time, I need to consider love, care and solidarity in my exploration of effective equality. Thank you. Should we have a queer work on the wall?
Okay, yeah, all right. Give me a. Yeah. Sorry? No, it's fine. We started later.
Thank you.
Do we need to turn this on? I think this is on.
Mine's on, is mine? Hello? 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 Is mine on?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dominic. Lots of really interesting and important things and urgent things. I will open it up very quickly, but I'll take the opportunity to just kind of kick off. One of the things that seemed to kind of be implicit within what you were talking about and thinking about care is a different sort of duration, a different sort of time frame for the development of projects. And that this isn't just a kind of incidental thing, but that this is actually fundamental to a kind of different mode of curating that is founded in this kind of reorientation of care. So I just wonder if you could maybe say a little bit more about those kind of durations and their kind of role or function within this, thinking about a constituent museum, but also in a kind of caring queer feminist curatorial practice.
One of the things with regards to duration is, especially when we're working with marginalised groups, I think, it's important that that group bonds. It's important that they come together and build a relationship with themselves in order to be able to open up and have really intimate and sometimes hurtful, sometimes painful conversations. And that doesn't happen if we invite 5 people for an hour on a Saturday afternoon. You know, nobody's going to open up and discuss things that are painful or hurtful or that were traumatic for them. And these exhibitions that we do at the Whitworth are always based around a concern within society at that time. So be that still parents, for example, with my colleague Lucy, around baby loss, which had never been done before, or be it with Undefining Queer, where we're bringing lots of people together, lots of different community groups within the umbrella of LGBTQ+I as well, together, that perhaps maybe have not hung out together before, so gay boys and lesbians, or younger people and older people, for example, that intergenerationality and those conversations that can be had between those two groups of people. It's important that we take the time to care for those conversations, to nurture those conversations, and to provide support for those conversations, so that these relationships can build up and we can have really meaningful exhibition making that really speaks to the concerns of the LGBTQ+ community at the moment. I referenced transness because that's one of the main concerns that is, that we need to be concerning ourselves around with the LGBTQ+ community at the moment, with the government stripping trans women systematically stripping them of rights. That's a concern. It's an urgency that we need to look at within society. But in order to be able to have trans people within the group open up about what is happening within society, or any other group member, they needed to be able to bond between themselves. And that takes time. It doesn't happen on a Saturday afternoon. And so care is really fundamentally important in providing space and time for those people to be able to bond. I was really, it was something that really shocked me, how quickly that they did bond and how closely they bonded together. Some of them live together now as flatmates, some of them have had relations, all kinds of stuff has gone on, as you can imagine. But, how they bonded really tightly. Some of the members now work at the Whitworth, some at the museum.
So just, who is that group then? Who is this group that you're talking about? How were they formed?
So they were formed through the LGBT Foundation, which works with lots of different community groups, and it was an expression of interest. We put a call out for participants to help with this exhibition, and it was an expression of interest that lots of people came together to people applied to be part of this group, and it was just after lockdown, so it was this need to come together anyway. We'd been so isolated, and this need to come together just after lockdown, and it was just a very different selection of people from the LGBT community. So they didn't know each other before. Nobody did, and they became very close within a matter of, within a few months. But it was during lockdown. We did invite them to come. It was when the galleries were still closed, but we allowed them to come in as a group with face masks on to look at the collection, and it was this really exciting period of the gallery still being closed, but then getting access behind the scenes and all those kind of things, which really excited everybody within the group as well. So it was those special moments as well that we could give them to in the gallery and in the stores and behind the scenes.
Amazing. I'm sure there'll be more questions about process. Just one other area that I kind of wanted to open up, which is when you were talking about queering as a process being about challenging normativity, challenging dominant structures, particularly thinking about kind of institutions. And I guess I was wondering, particularly then, kind of what needs queering or what needed queering about the infrastructures and technologies of the museum. And I guess I'm thinking as well about, you mention the idea of the museum or the space being a potential kind of refuge or an extension of these spaces of care, but also, I guess, in a normative sense, quite a problematic space for thinking about queerness, categorizations, labeling, representations, possession, ownership, exclusion. So all of that. So I'm kind of interested. Really, how do you start to open up the queering of those kind of entrenched technologies of the institution through this kind of curatorial process? Can you? Yeah.
It's very hard. I think it's really, really hard, and as you say, it's entrenched in everything. It's entrenched in the collection search system. When you look at, it's a very normative search system, so you can't put gay in or you can't put lesbian in or anything like that. Very normative. But the collection search system was specifically designed to be like that. It could have opened up to lots of other narratives, and it didn't. It wasn't. Somebody had made that decision for it to be a normative search system. So it's around. It is entrenched in everything, but it's chipping away at what needs to change, and it's slow. It's time again. It's needing time again to be able to chip away at things, because things don't happen that quickly, because everybody's got a workload to do. I absolutely have no doubt at all that the Whitworth is I will say safer space for queer people now. I'm not sure that you could ever say that any public building is a safe space. You can say it's a safer space, I think, where we advocate for lots of different groups. But it takes time to chip away at the infrastructure of the museum. We've got a brilliant new director from Tay who is really includes queering as a method within her approach to her own curatorial practice, what she wants to see at the Whitworth, which is amazing, because I hadn't heard that from two previous directors. I hadn't heard that this is a method that I'm going to use within my own practice in this gallery. I hadn't heard it. Certainly hadn't heard it with Maria, certainly Maria Bolshaw. I hadn't specifically heard it out of Alistair's, out of Alistair Hudson's mouth. But he was very supportive of the work that I was doing, and it was through Alistair that this whole starting to chip away at the system could happen. So yeah, it's time.
Can we go here first? We have
Thanks very much. I suppose I wanted to sort of pick up on that question and to put a bit of pressure on my perception is that Marxist feminist perspectives on care and Marxist lesbian feminist perspectives on care can give us really good tools for properly analysing some of the sort of issues around extraction and labour and the extraction of queer labour that is sort of evident within institutions like the Whitworth at present, who are very able to apprehend, on one hand, certain kinds of queer methods and approaches, and certain kinds of queer work, and certainly like queer work where, sort of visibility or the figure or the body is kind of, is staged in ways that are sort of, where there's a sort of, I think what we sort of see as a kind of an ease with which some of that material has like moved through the institution. And then at the other hand, and the Whitworth's a sort of, very pronounced example of this, we're also looking at a kind of period in which, censorship is so prevalent, and so we're sort of dealing, on the one hand with something around like what institutions can apprehend, what they can make public, and what that work that is extracted from from queers, as among others, in relation to these institutions. And then on the other, what, you know, in terms, I mean, Alistair Hudson is a very good example of it, like what cannot be said, what cannot be made visible in terms of his, you know, his removal from the Whitworth over his support of forensic architecture in Palestine. And I suppose I just wanted to sort of, I mean, I want to put that in the room, and I maybe don't want to ask you to have to sort of speak to all of that, because again, you know, it's like who has, yeah, but I think there is a real tension, and we'll see that more and more in you know, in relation to what's happened in, you know, the Equality Act, in relation to what's happening in Palestine, in these institutions where, you know, maybe we've had this brief period of sort of increased kind of visibility of sort of queer work, but where I think it's very difficult to sort of feel optimistic about how that's going to sort of continue.
Alistair Hudson. I didn't think that this would come back up. Yeah, so I can't really speak to that because it's I was not in the room, so I don't know about his the ins and the outs of his removal. What was said in the media was said in the media. Whether that was to save face for the institution, to save face for Alistair or whoever, I wasn't in the room, so I can't speak to that. I don't think that the work that we've been doing institutionally, and this extraction of Marxist labour, like you're saying, through the queers, I hope certainly isn't a flash in the pan, but as you're saying, as we know, as soon as a queer exhibition comes down, that space goes back to a normative space, right? It goes back to a standard normative space. So we constantly have to keep on trying. We all constantly have to keep on working to make something queer. However, I do feel that for the people that are working at the Whitworth at the moment, there is that care and there is that want to be an inclusive and accepting gallery. And I can speak for the Whitworth in that regards, because I work there and doing some of that work, like you're saying, but a lot of my colleagues are as well, who are straight. They're doing that work as well as allies. Particularly in October, we have a trans exhibition opening with Yuki Kahara, which is travelling from Norwich at the Sainsbury Centre at the minute, which we're really, really excited about. That would be the first trans exhibition that we've... and I say trans, they don't call themselves trans, they're Fafafini, so, you know, that's the Western name for it, but that would be the first non-cis artist that we've had within, you know, the Whitworth. So I really do believe when Sue Kyung says that, you know, queer is part of her method for the gallery. I do believe that. But I do also note that once an exhibition comes down and once Yuki finishes, then that'll be back to a normative space. So I can't really talk about the climate, or that institutional climate that is still really precarious. And, you know, I do feel sorry for the people in Poland at the moment, you know, where, you know, there's some of those LGBTQ plus exclusionary spaces, you know, where they're not, and now I imagine we'll go back to being, you know, there's a good example, you know, of that. But
absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, did that answer that question?
There was a question.
You wanted more details than I could tell you.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation and for this conversation. Sorry, I'm wood dodging heads. Which I think has raised all kinds of issues. But I just want to go back to a phrase that you used in your sort of account of your group project. And you talked about the importance of nurturing conversations and that might raise painful trauma. And I just wondered, are you confident that you have the capacity to deal with what might arise from that kind of conversation? Because it just left me a little concerned that that might be raised, but then, you know, how would someone follow that through? This is a language that's quite new to the art museum, but of course is more traditional within a sort of psychotherapeutic setting. So that's my. Is that clear enough as the question?
Yeah.
Can I just add the online question because it connects? So maybe just put them together. Somebody online has said, "Thank you for such an inspiring talk, Dominic." And I think they ask, "Can I ask? Has the group stayed bonded and supported? Do you check in with them as a therapeutic group in a care setting might do?" Or does your input end when the installation ends? So I think, again, these kind of connections to the kind of therapeutics and care element of this kind of work connects to Lynn's question.
I can't deal with a lot of the issues that arise within these group settings, and I acknowledge that within my presentation. I'm not a counsellor, I'm not don't work in mental health, and that's why we partner with organisations that have got wellbeing teams, that if anything does arise, then we have somebody at hand who can help point somebody in the right direction or give them some advice. But I don't have any of that expertise, and I acknowledge that we don't, but we do try and partner with organisations that have got that expertise to be able to help people. So, for example, with Still Parents, we worked with the antenatal death charity SANS. With Undefining Queer, we worked with the LGBT Foundation, and with the upcoming exhibition that we've got coming called Portraits of Recovery, we're working with those with that arts organisation that has all of those access to the support that's needed for those people.
I just wanted to just very quickly on the back of that. I think that's so vital to hear. I've seen so much desire to do projects with people in a very well-intentioned way without that partnership and that support network. And I think there's a huge amount of pressure being put on artists and curators to do that work, and very little thought about the infrastructure to support them. And there's so many examples I could talk about there. But the other thing I think that's really interesting to think about, of course, is that we don't even see follow-up through social care spaces. You know, people who are being chucked out of mental health units, etc., with no follow-up at all. So I think we're in this really, and it is a thing that came up. I feel like it's fallen out of discussion. There was a huge question about cultural institutions and filling the gap and what it means to fill that gap. And I guess there's one thing about, but it sounds like what you're doing here in this partnership work is something which does have, again, going back to duration, has a more kind of durational approach. And I just think we need to talk more about the ethics of this stuff. So I just want to say thank you for that. Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Thank you so much. Actually, like, my question kind of links back to that because, first of all, like, there are so many things that I would like to ask, and probably I'll grab you afterwards because it's just amazing. But you spoke a lot about the timeline, extended timelines beforehand, and you also spoke about just now how, you know, a queer space, but then it goes back to being normative. And I was wondering if you could maybe speak about some of the legacy, because of course you spoke about how some of the interventions were looking at collections and maybe looking at interpretations, and that's something that I've been finding quite interesting, of like potentially like the tension between temporary exhibitions versus a canon, temporary layering of interpretation versus, I don't know if, for example, like where the interpretation change in the permanent collections of those objects and so on. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question, thank you. We have now got a new collection search system that is shared between Manchester Art Gallery, Manchester Museum and the Whitworth, which gives a plurality of interpretations to artworks. So it gives, when you search for, say for example, this artwork here, this was in the Undefining Queer exhibition, it will come up with the exhibitions that it's been in, so it will say Undefining Queer, and it will have the interpretation labels that were written for the artworks. So when you search for them, it will have this plurality rather than just a singular narrative. Now it will have a plurality of narratives. So if this was in the Still Parents exhibition, it would have a narrative that was around that, or if it was in the upcoming Recovery's Creators exhibition, then it would have a plurality of, a narrative around that as well. So it has a plurality of narratives, the works that have been in the exhibitions. Of course, not all of the works. When we worked with the group, we queered over 800 artworks from the collection. And of course, not all of those artworks, and so it is limited in that regards, that not all of those 800 artworks will have that narrative associated with them. Although it would be good if they did, but of course it's time, capacity, we just don't, yeah. But that's a legacy of it, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a lot of questions and we don't have time for all of them. So I would say that unless there is someone that really, really has to ask a question now, you can always stop Dom during lunchtime.
If I know the answer to it.
Is there one final burning question? Let's go here. Sorry.
I'm hopeful this will be a really quick question. Thank you for that wonderful talk. And I was just really interested to, building on some of the things that people have discussed, and you talked about care for staff as part of, as a caring infrastructure. And I just wondered if there are particular ways of working you put in place, either just within your project team or across the organisation, in thinking about how you protect yourselves, whether that's from those external criticisms or from, listening to what are difficult and sensitive conversations. So if there's anything specific you could share on that, that would be great.
Yeah, we're quite lucky that we're a university institution, and so we've got all of the care facilities that the institution offers, such as counselling, etc. But we have each other as well, I guess. We can't protect ourselves from some of the issues that arise. Some of the public's questions that are given to us. Something that I'm grappling with at the moment, and that we're grappling as an institution at the moment, particularly in light of some of the recent exhibitions that we've had, is that the front of house, who are the lowest paid members of staff, are often the ones, and who make up the trans representation within our gallery space, are the ones that often take those questions, and that really, sometimes people are just horrible. Do you know what I mean? Full stop. And so it's emotional labour, and they're the least paid members of staff within the gallery space. And this is something that we've been talking about constantly over the last 4 months, around how to protect ourselves, how to protect our staff. And this is why we're part of this trans-inclusive policy, because it's not just us that's grappling with this. It's every institution out there that is doing queer programming, or that has trans elements to it, or things like that. We're really trying to understand and really trying to work with other institutions to develop means to be able to look after ourselves and look after our staff. But we are quite lucky that we're part of the University of Manchester, and we have those services that we can go to, or that can help us in some of these difficult conversations. But I understand that not all institutions have that support network.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dominic, and thank you for all the questions.